Let's take a look at the market's picture here, because as I was saying earlier, we did see the market record gains yet again, slightly more tempered though. So are we seeing some loss in momentum on the markets at the moment?
Hello, Alishia. Good morning, and thank you for having me. As you've indicated, the Nigerian equities on aggregate continued their appreciation, evidenced by yesterday's trading session, as we saw the market close marginally higher by approximately 0.2%, which might indicate to some that there is some loss of momentum there. But we think volumes are telling a much interesting story. The index is really just one market data point, and it does not need to be looked at independently. Yesterday we saw volumes somewhere north of about 920 million shares traded, which will indicate that, despite the selling, there's still a number of people, investors willing to take positions at these levels. And so ultimately, it becomes a question of how do these buyers and sellers, how do these forces ultimately interact in the long term. And our view is in the long term, we're going to see more buyers of Nigerian equities than sellers. In the near term, however, we think that it's possible that going into the fourth quarter, we might not see much appreciation in banking stocks, which drive the majority of the trading activity anyway. But in the near term, we're likely to see some appreciation as more information begins to trickle down on these banking stocks.
Well, we've certainly seen now the effect of clarity, or more clarity, in the banking sector, and the effect that that's managed to have in overall sentiment here. But there are still loud noises in the banking arena. Shareholders, for one, have faulted the sacking of these latest bank chiefs, saying that the action, along with the appointment of the new directors, have lacked ingredients of good corporate governance. What have you made of those comments?
Well, given that a number of these reforms being pursued by the central bank are still ongoing, we think, it may be a little premature to give a complete assessment of these developments. But naturally, we think there are a lot of accomplishments, or a lot of good things that can come out of all these reforms. The number one issue being transparency. The central bank, needs to take credit for the improved transparency that we're beginning to see in the banking system. For a very long time, we all knew that the banking sector was under significant stress. We all knew that the liquidity positions of a number of these banks had been significantly deteriorated, and the ability of these banks to perform their primary function of supplying credit to the real sector, had been significantly diminished. And so, along with improved transparency that we've seen recently, we are able to have more information about these banks, and we are able to take positions in these banking sector appropriately. Now, the murmurs that you're hearing, in our view, likely not to be will likely not be sustained in the long term. I think people need to look at some of these reforms as a necessary thing that needs to be done, so that to ultimately bring more confidence into the Nigerian banking system.
Well, just looking at another headline that's really caught attention is the fact that we've had the Nigerian Minister of Finance recently announce during the World Bank and IMF meeting in Turkey that the president has confirmed and approved the release of $2 billion from the excess crude account in order to stimulate a number of sectors within the Nigerian economy. Discuss that development with us and what the markets have been making of that news.
Well, yes, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Remi Babola, recently announced that the Nigerian president had approved approximately $2 billion, which will serve as some kind of stimulus for the economy. Well, this has actually been discussed for some time now. I think discussions concerning some stimulus needed for the economy was initiated sometime earlier this year, and I'm glad to know that finally it's been approved. All these talks about stimulus, it's all in good, but I think at the end of the day, we need to be able to have accountability for how these funds are dispersed. The source of these proceeds are actually going to come from crude savings account, the excess crude account. Nigeria, it's interesting to know, it has only been able to save only about 2.5% of this excess crude account. And so I think any sort of expense, common fiscal expense pursued by the government needs to, at some point, we need to hold people accountable. We need to have plans for what exactly the money is going to be used for. People need to be clear about this, the transmission mechanism. Where does this money come from and where does it end up? We need to make sure that this money is being directed appropriately into the hands of people who can ultimately make a difference in the Nigerian economy.
Well,
and so those are some of the issues that we have.